DP. Charlie to write something. The teacher, Miss Toffee, was walking around and inspecting everyone's work. She was very critical and strict. She carried a long wooden ruler with which she banged hard on the table and made everyone jump. Charlie attempted to answer more sums, and he felt like his brain was going to explode with all of the concentration and effort involved. Here she comes, he thought, as she walked towards him with all of the coldness of an iceberg, and he knew that he was doomed. She tapped the ruler on his desk, a sure sign of annoyance and misplaced power. Not good, Charlie. You've only just managed to do three sums, and they are all wrong, she said. Charlie gulped. Hold your hand out, she said, and he did as he was told, as he watched the ruler sailing through the air. He knew what was coming. Thwack! He felt his fingers sting as if he'd been stung by 100 bees. It was that painful. She smiled a wicked smile. It was obvious that she was enjoying herself. Next time it will be 3 strikes, she spat out as she walked away to inspect the other pupils' work, none of which she bullied like she bullied him. Tears filled Charlie's eyes and he looked down at his poor hand, and it had a red streak across it and it was buzzing, as if he was holding on to an electrified fence. His dislike for school intensified, and he just wanted the bell to ring so that he could run his poor hand under the cold water to alleviate the terrible pain. Tinker was Charlie's best friend. He was the only person he could talk to. He was small with a shock of reddish ginger hair and freckles. He was called Tinker because he loved to find things and dust them off and make a tidy profit. They were as tight as 2 peas in a pod against the world. They didn't care that people talked about them. They were loners who had found each other. It was their destiny. Charlie didn't look pleased, and Tinker immediately could see that something was wrong. What happened to your hand? He said. Charlie rubbed his hands together to try and rub away the burning pain. Hello, viewers. It was her, he said. Miss Toffee. She's horrible, said Tinker. We'll have to do something about her. We had no idea what, said Tinker. Charlie began to smile. He always did when he was with Tinker. He always cheered him up. I can't wait to wake up tomorrow and know I'm not getting up for school, said Charlie. Me too, said Tinker. I hope that we can have some fun. Hello, viewers. Defo, said Charlie, and he drank his cola and he began to feel a lot better. The swelling in his hand had begun to go down and the pain was becoming bearable. Hello, viewers, please sub me if you like it. You need to tell your mum about her, said Tinker. She can't get away with this. Charlie knew he was right, but the last thing he wanted was to upset his mum. He dunked a chocolate biscuit into his cola and pondered on what to do for the next few days. We'll have to have more fun on this holiday, said Tinker. We need to make the best of it, he said wisely. Hello, Darcy. Charlie looked over at all of the other pupils and he began to feel uncomfortable. People were staring and whispering, and Charlie knew that they were talking about them. Don't worry, said Tinker. Just ignore them. We're the cool ones, he said with a wink, and Charlie smiled. He wasn't sure if this was true, but it did the trick. All they had to do was to survive a few more lessons, and then a long hot summer of freedom and adventure beckoned. Hello, everyone. It was a long time coming, but the bell finally rang, and Charlie felt all of the stresses and strains of the day fall away. Tinker was outside waiting for him and munching on an apple. Thank God that's over, he said before taking another big bite. He was always hungry. Be careful, said Charlie. You don't want to choke at the start of the school holidays. Unfortunately, this remark made Tinker laugh, which in turn nearly made him choke. It was the opposite of Charlie's intentions. They walked out together from the school gates to freedom. There was a group of boys gathering outside the gates, and they were pushing and pulling each other about and trying to act tough to impress the girls. Charlie and Tinker had very little interest in girls. When they walked past the group, the gang stopped pushing and pulling and stared at Charlie and Tinker. It was a bit worrying. Tinker took it in his stride, but Charlie could feel himself getting nervous. He blushed easily and it just made people target him more. Where are you two going hand in hand? Said the biggest one of the gang. He was about 6 foot tall, with curly blonde hair and dark piercing eyes, and they could feel his eyes burning into them. Keep calm, whispered Tinker. Charlie did his best to feel calm, but he felt himself growing hot and sweaty, and then it just got worse. He stuffed his shaking hands into his deep pockets. The giant of a boy stood before them, and Tinker was losing his patience. He had a temper, and he didn't like people telling him what to do. But when he looked up at the boy, he knew that his chances of coming out on top were slim. Charlie managed to sidestep the group, but Tinker wasn't so lucky. Out of my way, said Tinker with a mixture of bravery and foolishness. The tall boy didn't move an inch. He was as steady and as immovable as an old oak tree. Then he raised his fists. Oh, hang on. 8, 9. Then he raised his fists. This is a bad sign. This is a bad sign. Oh, next page. Bloody hell. His name was Jockey, and he was a fiery Scot with a chip on his shoulder the size of Ben Nevis. When the teacher tried to remonstrate with him, Jockey knocked the books out of his hands, and that was a big mistake. Please submit, viewers, if you like it. The harassed-looking teacher frog-marched him back into school without a backward glance. The crowd scattered like bored birds, and Tinker brushed himself down and walked back over to a guilty-looking Charlie. Thanks for your help, mate, he said, as he put his arm round him. He knew that Charlie wasn't into fighting, and he was just pulling his leg, as he loved to do. Tinker had first met Charlie on his first week at school, when he was being bullied in the school corridor, and all of the pupils were walking past unconcerned, all except Tinker. Tinker couldn't stand seeing anyone getting bullied, especially someone as innocent looking as Charlie. He had a group of boys around him, and his books were scattered all over the corridor. He was crying, and that just made them more vicious. Tinker stepped in, and within 3 minutes 2 of the bullies were on the floor, holding their chins which he had kicked. The other bully was gathering up Charlie's books with a well-deserved black eye, and after that they became firm friends. Charlie needed someone to keep an eye on him, and Tinker loved Charlie because he made him laugh, and they walked home, chatting about all of the fun they were going to have on their school holidays. Charlie was still nervous, as he had expected the thugs to be running after them. Don't worry, said Tinker, I'll look after you. Charlie smiled. He'd never had anyone on his side before, and it gave him a fuzzy feeling, like he'd eaten a big spoonful of warm porridge. Charlie had never had anyone to protect him. His dad had run away with the secretary when Charlie was only small, but Charlie didn't miss him that much. All that Charlie could remember about him was the strong stench of his cigars, that he was always in a rush. His dad was in and out of the house like a bewildered bee. It was as if he didn't really want to be there, and it was no surprise, with such an attractive-looking secretary waiting for him in her London apartment. All through that time his mum read and read and read to keep it from her mind. There were books on top of the TV, books behind the sofa, in the kitchen, in the toilet, not literally, and even in the dog kennel. His mum was book mad, and it drove Charlie mad. This is why he loved comics so much. He needed to see pictures, as he was surrounded by words all day. It was exhausting. Charlie, read this, Charlie, read that, his mum always said as she thumbed another big fat book. She was in her own world, and when Charlie's dad left, never to return, she just kept on reading, as if it didn't matter. But every now and again, Charlie would notice a tear moving through her big spectacles, and his heart would go out to her, and then she would just sniff, and the tear would drop onto the page, and she would say, I've got a cold, dear. But Charlie knew better. He loved his mum, and he hated seeing her so upset. Charlie hadn't ever thought of his dad, and he saw Tinker as his father figure, but he wouldn't dream of telling him. Whenever Charlie felt low, he would lay on his bed and read his Spider-Man comics, and then he would be transported to a world of excitement and adventure. He became Spider-Man, and he flew over the rooftops and shot out webbing and stopped criminals in their tracks. Charlie was more like his mum than he realized. They both preferred fantasy to reality. Thank you, viewers. Hope you liked it. Please submit. I'll be back later.